Welcome back to another episode from the Optimal Body Podcast. I'm Dr. Jen.
And I'm Dr. Dom.
And today we are talking about scapular winging. So that shoulder blade popping off the back. What does it mean? Is it bad? And what can we do about it? Yeah, so when we're talking about scapular winging, we're thinking the lower edge of that shoulder blade that is closest to the spine is kind of popping off of the rib cage. And that's where you can kind of see like some space underneath that shoulder blade. And what happens if that back portion is then popping off, that means the shoulder blade's kind of rotating forward and up just a little bit. So it almost think of rounded shoulders, but a little bit more just in the shoulder blade rather than the shoulders itself on the front. And that's why you kind of get that winging. And a lot of people see it through movement or exercise.
Yeah, like if I do this certain movement, then I notice my shoulder blade pops out this certain way. And the shoulder blade or the scapula is kind of in an interesting spot because it's just kind of floating there. It's not like directly attached to another joint, and it has like a bajillion things connecting into it. Like we got the upper trap and the biceps, and we got our rotator cuff muscles.
All of the rotator cuff muscles. So if we think of all those stabilizers or anything that kind of pinches underneath that shoulder blade, we got the stabilizing, the serratus anterior.
The serratus anterior, our rhomboids, all those things that tuck our shoulders back.
Our traps.
The lats even, and some people will connect through the bottom edge of the bottom angle of that shoulder blade.
And that's where a lot of people like to say, well, if it's super tight pecs or super tight lats, I just need to rub them out. I need to massage them out.
Stretch the pec and then strengthen the retractors.
Yeah, which it's like, well, why is my brain connecting to my pec muscle, or why is my brain connecting to my lat to say, you are my stabilizer. You are the muscle that's going to control my movement here. It's almost like, is it an angry muscle or is it an overpowering muscle? As we've continued to study this throughout the years, like early on in physical therapy, that was the thing that you look for. If someone has shoulder pain, they probably have some what we call shoulder dyskinesia, or just kind of funky, weird shoulder blade movement through their shoulder range of motion. And we're coupling those two. But as we've continued to study, we cannot correlate scapular dyskinesia, or again, like as you're raising your arm, one shoulder blade kind of takes a little time to get up there, or doesn't quite move right, or maybe elevates or does crazy things as we're moving, different than the other side. But what we're seeing is that we can't correlate it. Some studies can be like, oh yeah, like more athletes got injured. And then where others were like, that didn't correlate at all. And I think one of the other studies that really popped out to me too, there was a study that looked at two groups of people who had shoulder pain, or subacromial shoulder pain, which really just means pain in that shoulder region. Okay. And usually with like overhead lifting, it could think of bursitis, rotator cuff, impingement, any of those kinds of things. Any
AC joint, anything.
Yeah. So think of all of those things. And what they did is they separated these people into two groups. One who did just kind of rotator cuff strengthening, which still attaches onto the shoulder blade.
But the shoulder blade is more in a stable position. It's kind of, it's not moving. The shoulder blade's not doing the motion.
And then another group that did rotator cuff exercises plus additional like 6 to 8 scapular stabilizing exercises. And they did exercises that really just focused on really drawing the shoulder blades back and down and together. And so if we think of like when people are usually telling us go into good posture, it's usually bring the shoulder blades back and then draw them back into your pockets, like that, into your back pockets. It's what was kind of like the language that they used in physical therapy school. And so those were really like the scapular stabilizer muscles or exercises that they focused on. And what they found was that there was no difference between the two groups after 8 weeks. So they did these exercises 3 times a week for 8 weeks. And at the end of the day, both groups reported the same level of, how their pain changed, but they also looked at muscle strength, they looked at shoulder range of motion, and in both groups, they had the same improvements. And so really at the end of the day, they said, well, this didn't mean anything. And so you can add shoulder stabilizing muscle or exercises into your exercise program if you want to. It might not mean that there's going to be any significant change.
I think more what that is pointing out too is that, okay, all we knew about those people is they were all having shoulder pain. Mm-hmm. And we've already talked about how hundreds of different things can be contributing to that shoulder pain, right? So if we blanket assign the same thing to everybody, it's not really going to be addressing specifically what they might need. So I would kind of expect similar change in all of them, because some of them, it might not be helping at all with their specific imbalances or their specific patterns. Secondly, if we're, again, just focusing on, they have shoulder pain, let's look at the shoulder, let's look at the shoulder blade, even let's throw in the shoulder blade, right?
Yeah.
Those areas are so connected to how the back moves, how the neck might be positioned, what our rib cage is doing on top of our pelvis, and how those are in relation to each other. And it's like, okay, we can do these in a controlled, stationary environment, rotator cuff and scapular stabilization. But as soon as we stand up and try doing that scapular exercise, what's our rib cage and our pelvis doing? And how have we coordinated those to move better together?
Exactly. Now I'm going to the store and I'm lifting things, or I have my kid, or I have my, how are these all relating to functional movement, which is what we're trying to get people back to anyways. Yeah. And when we only focus on the shoulder blade, it's like the same thing of just focusing on the pain area, which is really hard for me, because I don't like to say, this is your pain, this is what to do for this area. And we've talked about the reason why before in other podcasts. But especially when it comes to the shoulder blade, like Dom said, the rib cage is a huge component. If your rib cage isn't even expanding, so movement into the rib cage based on your diaphragmatic breathing, your shoulder blades don't have a good place to glide over in the first place. So other muscles are going to have to work and compensate to help. So that's one right there. Yeah, how are we breathing? Shocker, we bring that up all the time. Mm-hmm. How is that upper back moving? And then, like we do in the Optimal Body membership, when we take these muscle activations, we're not just focusing on the shoulder blade, but we take it all the way down to what your feet doing. Mm-hmm. And we say from your feet to your pelvis to your rib cage to your shoulder blade. Now we're going to have a better idea of how that's going to functionally, go into standing, how it's functionally going to go into loading and into other movements, because that's really where it becomes beneficial. It's really just feedback for the mind. Everything is like, can we get this mind-body connection in terms of what is supposed to be moving as, especially in this case, breathing.
You talked about expanding through the ribs.
Yeah, we want that rib cage to expand so that the diaphragm has room to actually lift and contract the way that we breathe. And so when we're getting this feedback, we're actually then, if my rib cage is going to expand, I'm going to get different changes in my thoracic spine, which I just did this also in the Almost 30 virtual camp. I had 10 minutes to try to get these people to feel something different, because someone else's session ran over. And so I'm like, okay, here we go. And all I did was let's test our range of motion through the thoracic spine, just kind of sit and rotate. Now we're just going to breathe. Where are you breathing from? Getting this rib cage to move. And then I had them retest. And the comments into that section were like, oh my gosh, my range of motion is so much better. And all these crazy things. It was so much fun to watch. But that's why it's we can get so much more movement change when we actually just start to come back to that foundational piece, which is what we do in the membership. And then another one is protraction and retraction. A lot of people have heard of that. So that means protraction is when those shoulder blades are going to move away from the spine and they're going to go forward. And then retraction is bringing the shoulder blades back toward the spine. Now, the goal is to be able to do this without using your arms. The first thing I like to do is have people just have the arms out at the side and keep the elbows straight. And now, can I move just from my shoulder blades forward and back? And then can I do it with my arms out straight? Then can I do it with my arms straight overhead? And what a lot of people want to do is row, right? I want to bend my elbows with the movement kind of thing. Or even if you're in a plank position and people want to bend the elbows to kind of get that shoulder blade, don't feel bad if that happens. Especially if you're new to this motion. So common. I get almost every client that I've introduced this movement to, that's the first thing that happens. But really being able to control those ranges without the arms, without lifting up or pulling down, just pure movement, forward, back, up, down, being able to control that down. And that's where a lot of people can find that scapular dyskinesia is when they lift the arm up. If you take a video and you try to slowly lower your arm down, you might see like some, either all of a sudden the shoulder blade just comes crashing down, or it's like boop, 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 boop. It's like kind of like swirly, bouncing back down because it's like, whoa, I don't know how to control this range. And it's almost kind of a cool thing. Like how cool to like see your movement. And so, this is why I love videotaping. And I remember even when I was teaching Pilates, and one of the first things that I would just start posting videos like this on Instagram of me teaching Pilates on the reformer and stuff. And I remember one of the first times I was just doing like banded retraction, and I was like super lean and ripped back then too. And I would see, the first time I saw my shoulder blades from the back, I was like, whoa, that's what people are seeing. Like, it looked crazy. My muscles were popping. Things were happening. Yeah. One shoulder blade might have been doing something different. It was cool to see, though. I think it's so cool to just start to gain this awareness and not be afraid of movement. That just goes into like, we don't have awareness, right? If my back has to arch and my rib cage flares in order to pull my shoulder blades back and down, well, do I really have control of just what my shoulder blades are doing over the trunk, which is, again, what we do in the membership all the time. And sometimes people need, like, I've had clients that need to start that, like elevating the hands onto a table. Like,
or against a wall.
Yeah, right. Or against a wall. And the moment you do that, because you really get to see, is my sternum kind of moving and rounding as I'm pushing? Like, does my rib cage move? Or can I keep that stable and, again, only move from that pure shoulder blade movement? So it's fun to explore. And one of the stories and one of the things that always has kept with me since physical therapy school was we watched a video of a physician who was kind of giving a lecture. And so there was like a big group of people in front of him. And he had this kid up who had shoulder pain, but the physician didn't know which shoulder he had pain in. And the physician was just kind of going through like, oh, this is what I would look at, and da-da-da. And he's like, oh, let's look at his shoulder range of motion. And the kid would lift his arms in different planes. And what the physician noticed was that there was one shoulder blade that was kind of a little funky, like whether it didn't track very nicely or it kind of bounced and it did some weird stuff. And so he was like, well, because this shoulder blade doesn't move well like the other one, this is probably the shoulder that you have pain in, right? And the kid's like, oh no, actually it's the other one. And as embarrassing as that might be as you're giving a big lecture, it just goes to show we cannot determine that funky movement means pain or means injury, right? And overall message is just to continue to explore the body, continue to explore your awareness of what you have within your body so that you can gain control, you can gain strength, and that you can gain better awareness of your body in general.
Thanks again for joining us for another PT Pearl from the Optimal Body podcast on that scapular winging. Hopefully you found a few things out about how you can approach that. Comment below, subscribe, let us know what you want to learn, because we're going to keep coming with these PT Pearls.